The broadcast command scrolled across every public screen in known space, its text rendered in 17 diplomatic languages. The Grand Council of the Convergent Races, sovereign body of 10 elder species, had announced a live execution. The condemned was a human, female, age 16 standard cycles, designated Amara Vass. The charge: sedition, sabotage, and direct involvement in the Kellys' uprising that had cost the council 3 garrison cruisers and a planetary governor. On the human embassy station, Ambassador Selastor stood rigid in the observation gallery, his gray tunic darkened with sweat. The chamber around him was designed to intimidate, a half circle of raised plinths where the council delegates loomed like carved effigies. The Cath Archon, a hulking biped with burnished bronze skin and 6 expressionless eyes, read the sentence with ritual slowness. The child will be rendered to elemental dispersal in 27 of your minutes. The broadcast will serve as instruction. Tor's voice cut through the translator. Lag, this is an atrocity. She's a minor. Any action she took was under duress from a regime you yourselves brutalized for 2 centuries. The Veil Prefect, slender and scaled, tilted her head. Your species has filed 12 formal protests in the last decade. Each was noted and discarded. This execution is lawful under the Accords of Dominion. Your accords are a chain around every species you've elevated. Humanity never signed them. We were never given the option. The Archon dismissed the objection with a flick of a massive hand. You exist at our tolerance. The broadcast proceeds. Tor's security implant vibrated. Silent message from Earth Command. 1. Word steady. He swallowed his fury and watched the main display flicker to the execution platform on the council's hub. World. The feed showed a circular chamber walled in pale alloy. At its center, a slender figure in a plain gray shift stood inside a ring of emitter prisms. Amara Vass had dark hair pulled back in a simple knot and a face that still carried the soft lines of youth. But her posture belonged to someone far older. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't crying. Her eyes, deep brown and startlingly direct, looked straight into the captured drone as though she could see through it to every living being watching across the galaxy in habitats, colonies in the home world, cities of humanity. People gathered in silence. Some held hands, some wept. Many clenched their jaws until their teeth knocked. On Mars, a retired fleet commander watched with a glass of water untouched in his grip. On the orbital city of Empire, a mother covered her daughter's eyes, then lowered her hand, deciding the girl needed to see. The feed continued. The emitter prisms began to glow with a cold, humming light. Synthesized voice announced the countdown. 27 minutes. Tor's gaze remained fixed on Amara. Something wasn't right. She should have been broken or at least hollow. Instead, she appeared to be waiting patiently, purposefully, as if the real event hadn't started yet. Deep in the hyperwave bands that carried the execution across light years, a secondary signal emerged. It wasn't visible on civilian feeds, but every military sensor platform in Council space registered it simultaneously. A pulse of structured energy repeating in a precise cadence. It began soft, then grew, layering itself into the broadcast carrier like a second spine. The pulse triggered no alarms because it matched no known attack profile. It was simply there, counting down from 27 minutes. The Council's intelligence adjutant, a slender Zarai with milk-blue skin, suddenly stiffened at his console. Archon were detecting anomalous signal. Infiltration across the primary relay. Network. Origin unknown. Suppressing. We cannot, it's piggybacked onto the execution feed at the foundational code level. Severing it would kill the broadcast entirely. The Archon 6 eyes narrowed in a synchronized blink, then let it run. It is irrelevant. The adjutant's mouth opened, then closed. The sensor log showed the signal. Structure was impossibly complex, woven with fractal algorithms that seemed almost organic. Worse, it was interacting with Council infrastructure. Nodes on thousands of worlds slipping into dormant maintenance ports that had been quiet for centuries. Ambassador to notice the flicker of unease on the alien faces. His own implant pulsed again. This time the message was longer. Latchkey confirmed. All assets in position. The key is aware. The key. They told him Amara was important. They hadn't told him she was. This, he forced himself to watch. The countdown on the display dropped below 26 minutes. The girl's calm was no act of defiance. It was a weapon. On the hub world, 100 light years from any human fleet, a technician monitoring the execution chamber's power grid noticed a minor fluctuation. He logged it, then returned his attention to the ceremony. He did not notice the way the chamber's emergency access nodes had all shifted to standby mode. The error logs buried the change under 50 layers of routine maintenance code. The signal's cadence changed subtly, accelerating by a fraction of a beat. To a human musician, it might have sounded like a shift from simple time to a polyrhythm. To the Council's machine networks, it felt like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting to open for generations. The countdown reached 25 minutes and 40 seconds. Amara's lips moved. The audio didn't pick it up, but a lip reader on Empirean Station later swore she said 3 words not long now. The Galactic Council had just handed humanity the one thing it needed, the undivided attention of every soul in the galaxy, tuned to a single frequency. And in the shadow of that broadcast, something immense began to wake. Part 2. The emitter prisms brightened until the air itself shimmered with contained destruction. Low harmonic thrum through the chamber floor, vibrating up through Amara's bare feet. The Archon's voice rolled across the broadcast like grinding stone. Let the condemned speak her final words. Drone angled close. Amara's face filled the screens, and when she spoke, her voice carried no tremor. It was clear, high, and terribly gentle. You have 27 minutes. After that, the galaxy turns. The Archon made a dismissive rumble. Sentence will now be carried out. The prisms discharged. A wall of white energy collapsed inward toward the girl's body, designed to break molecular bonds in a silent, painless annihilation. What happened instead was a cascade of failures that began in 8 systems simultaneously. Above the KE home world of Duras, flight of orbital defense platforms registered proximity warnings and then went dark. From the blackness where no ship should have been, human cruisers emerged with their hulls shedding stealth laminate like dead skin. They weren't the boxy industrial vessels the Council had cataloged in humanity's border fleets. These ships were lean, angular, and coated in a material that drank active sensors. They opened fire before the platforms could reboot. On the execution chamber's feed, the disintegration field faltered. The emitter prisms flickered, sparked, and died in a shower of molten glass. Alarms howled across the hub world security network, but the network itself was fragmenting under the weight of something far more subtle than a direct assault, a logic plague that unspooled command protocols one thread at a time. Amara still stood in the center of the circle unharmed. Smoke curled from the ruined emitters, a thin line of blood traced her temple where a fragment had cut her, but her expression hadn't changed. The council delegates erupted. The Keth Archon bellowed for an explanation. The Veil Prefect was already retreating toward a shielded exit, her scales flushing and alarmed. Violet, on the observation gallery, Ambassador Tor allowed himself a thin, bitter smile. Two human Marines in full combat gear materialized beside him, optical camouflage shedding, and placed a shield barrier between him and the chaos. Ambassador, the lead Marine said, "Extraction ready." "Not yet. I want to see their faces." In the execution chamber, access hatches blew inward. Human strike teams in matte black armor poured through, moving with a fluid economy that made the council's ceremonial guards look like mannequins. The guards raised plasma lances, the human point agent dropped 3 of them before the 4th could squeeze a trigger. The sound of his weapon, a sharp percussive snap rather than a sizzle. A voice crackled through Amara's submal implant. "Key status." She touched the implant behind her ear. Intact. The field glitched exactly at the 5% mark. "Nice timing. We had a bet going." Captain owes me a bottle. She almost laughed. The strike leader reached her, a tall woman with a ranked sigil on her shoulder and a visor that reflected the chamber's dying emergency lights. "Ma'am, we have a 30-second window before their secondary grid resets. We need to move." Amara nodded and stepped over the shattered prisms. She didn't look back at the dead guards. She learned to compartmentalize that part of herself. Years ago, outside the chamber, the world's corridors had descended into Bidum. Civilian aides ran, automated defense turrets fired randomly or not at all, their IFFF systems cycling through corrupted identity tables. The logic plague, the turn spread in concentric waves, jumping from military subnets to public infrastructure, traffic control, lost synchronization, and a light cargo hauler plowed into a landing pad tower, shearing its upper decks in a shower of sparks on the broadcast which stubbornly refused to die. Viewers across the galaxy saw the last moments of coherent footage. The human Marines escorting Amara through a service tunnel, a council guard lunging, a muzzle flash, and then the feed dissolved into static, replaced by a single graphic, a human emblem, a circle divided by a diagonal line with the ancient word latchkey rendered beneath it in standard script. Then every screen on every council-controlled world station and ship displayed the same image. The signal was no longer hidden. It had commandeered the entire network. In the ambassador's observation gallery, the KE Archon roared and smashed a console. "What have you done?" To stepped forward until he was inches from the Archon's bulk. The Marine shield hummed, ready to deflect a blow. "You wanted to teach us a lesson. You wanted to show the galaxy what happens to a human who defies you. Instead, you gave us the largest audience in history and 27 minutes of uninterrupted access to your Core systems, you executed nothing. You lit a fuse. The Archon 6 eyes went wide, a junior Zare analyst at his side. Station began to weep, not from fear, but because the telemetry from the Dura's defense fleet had just updated. Every capital ship in the system was drifting dead in space, life support nominal but weapons and engines locked. The countdown that had started at 27 minutes reached zero across the galaxy. Human fleets that had hidden for half a century in the folds of dark space in hollowed asteroids in the coronas of unstable stars received the final activation pulse. They moved, and aboard the stealth cruiser Resolute Vow, Amara Vass was strapped into a neural interface cradle, her mind already reaching outward into the tactical net, becoming something more than a girl, more than a soldier, becoming the instrument that would finish what the broadcast had begun. Part 3, 3 years earlier. In a facility buried beneath the lunar surface, Amara had sat across from a gay-haired woman whose eyes held the cold weight of stars. The woman's name was Director Vaughn, and she never wasted words. You understand what we're asking, Vaughn said. The Council's intelligence agencies have already flagged you as a person of interest. They've connected you to the Kellys' operation. Within 18 months they'll have enough to move. When they take you, you can't resist. Amara then 13 had shrugged. I know. I've read the profiles. The KE interrogation methods cause permanent neural damage. The Veil prefer chemical extraction. I'm ready. It's not about endurance. It's about being inside the broadcast. Vaughn had laid out Operation Latchkey on a holographic table, its architecture branching like a tree of light. The central premise was brutally simple. The Council's obsession with public spectacle was a structural weakness. Their execution broadcasts used a specific carrier protocol that interfaced with every major comm node in their territory. For almost a century, human intelligence had been embedding dormant subroutines into those nodes, tiny inert code fragments that resembled maintenance backdoors. Alone they did nothing, but triggered by the correct key delivered through the execution feed at precisely the right interval, they would cascade into a cascade failure of every council military system. The key was a living neural signature, a human mind conditioned to broadcast a specific electrochemical pattern in sync with the carrier wave. The 27-minute countdown wasn't arbitrary. It was the exact period required for the pattern to propagate and authenticate across the entire network. Amara had been genetically screened at birth, then shaped through years of neuro conditioning. She was in every sense the physical key to the turn. And if they execute me before the 27 minutes, she asked. They won't, Van had replied. They'll want to draw it out. They always do. The spectacle is the point. Now on the Resolute Vow, Amara lay in the interface cradle, her eyes closed and her breathing slow. The ship's medical AI monitored her vitals while the tactical net unfolded around her consciousness like a vast three-dimensional scoreboard. She could feel the positions of every human vessel, every council ship going dark, every station broadcasting panic. The memories of the lunar facility flickered at the edges of her awareness. The endless drills, the isolation, the day. Vaughn had told her, you'll be alone on that platform and you'll be the most powerful person in the galaxy. Hold that contradiction. Don't let it crack you. She held it, a tactical officer's voice. Reached her through the link, turn. Progression at 82%. Council 5th Fleet, near the Vale border, is attempting a manual override. They've disconnected from the main network and are running on auxiliary command loops. Show me, Amara whispered, her mind painted the tactical display in shades of fire and shadow. The 5th Fleet 40 cruisers, a dreadnought and support craft was limping toward a jump point, their systems flickering as engineers fought to bypass the logic plague. They were slow, disorganized, but still dangerous. Task Force Cinder is in position, the tactical officer said. They're requesting key designation for priority targets. Amara's consciousness flowed into the sensor feeds of Task Force Cinder. She saw the Council dreadnought through the eyes of a forward reconnaissance drone. A massive scarred vessel with a hull like beaten copper. Its main gun turrets were still operational. That had to end. Designating dreadnought as primary, she said. Disable, don't destroy. I want their command crew alive to broadcast a surrender. Understood. Cinder 1 engaging. 12 human destroyers dropped out of a micro jump and saturated the dreadnought. Shields with kinetic penetrators. The shields held for 4 seconds, then failed. Precision railgun slugs punched through the turret housings, turning the massive cannons into twisted scrap. Escape pods began to eject. Amara felt the crew's terror as a distant pressure. At the edge of her awareness, she pushed it aside. There would be time for guilt later. If she let it in now, she'd drown. The Vale prefect's voice suddenly cut into a Council emergency channel. It was meant to be encrypted, but the turn had gutted their encryption. This is Prefecture. All remaining fleet elements fall back to the Rixis Nebula. We will regroup and coordinate. Counteroffensive. Priority 1. Locate and eliminate the human key. She is the Nexus. Amara smiled, a small, weary thing. Cillier still thought this was a conventional war. She still thought cutting off the head would stop the body. They're hunting me, Amara said over the command channel. Good. While they're looking at the key, they won't see the door closing behind them. Turn surged past 90%. On 80 worlds, ground-based defense cannons went inert. Military supply depots locked their own doors, sealed by authentication protocols that suddenly recognized human authority. A Keth garrison commander shot his terminal rather than let it give orders to his own soldiers. And in the Council's deepest archives, a final hidden node activated, one that humanity had planted not in a maintenance port, but in the chamber of the Council's most forbidden relic, the Zio's engine. The tactical officer's voice sharpened. Amara were picking up a massive energy signature from the Council core systems. It's not part of the turn. It's God's. It's old. Amara's calm fractured for the first time. She felt it too, a presence in the net, cold and vast, stirred from dormancy. The Council had done what Vaughn had always feared. They opened the vault. Part 4. The Zio's engine was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a terraforming relic from a species that had gone extinct before the Council's founding civilizations had learned to smelt copper. Its intended purpose was to reignite dying stars, but its energy coupling could be inverted. Inverted it could snuff a sun in the space of a single breath. The Council, in its desperation, aimed at its saw. Aboard the resolute vow, every alarm shrieked. Amara's Neuralink spiked with a torrent of data, the engine's activation sequence, its targeting locks, its unstoppable power draw that was siphoning energy from 3 nearby gas giants. The relic was a gravitation monster, and it was already beginning to focus. Time to firing, the tactical officer reported, voice tight. 11 minutes. Amara sat up in the interface cradle, tearing the sensor pads from her temples. The turn can't touch it, it's too old. It predates the network architecture by 100 million years. Admiral Cito, the fleet commander, appeared on the hollow screen. Her face was a mask of forced calm. We're analyzing possible intercept courses. Even at maximum burn, our closest squadron is 14 minutes out. Then we don't intercept it with ships, Amara said. We interface directly. The bridge crew stared. Cito's expression didn't change. Explain. The engine has a guardian intelligence. Every terraforming relic of this class did. It's not an AI like ours, it's more like a preserved consciousness, a mind that decides whether the requester is worthy. The council bypassed the guardian by brute forcing the activation circuits, but that's not the same as controlling it. If I can reach the guardian, I might be able to convince it to reject the activation. Say it considered for a full 2 seconds. How do you reach it? Amara touched her implant. The same way I reach the turn. But I can't do it alone. This isn't code, it's a full immersion. Mind. The neural load will kill me if I carry it solo. I need volunteers to link in parallel, distribute the stress. The admiral turned to the bridge crew. Before she could speak, 12 hands were already raised. You don't have to, Cito began. Yes, we do, said a young navigation officer named Pell, who had a wife and a newborn on Mars. 11 minutes. Ma'am, the volunteers were brought to the interface bay. They lay on cradles in a ring around Amara. Their neural patterns sync through a medical manifold that would fuse their minds into a temporary gestalt. The attending neurologist warned them that the feedback could cause permanent cognitive damage. None of them hesitated. Amara closed her eyes in dove. The guardian met her in a space that was not space, a formless void where thought took on texture and color. The intelligence was ancient, vast, and utterly inhuman. It perceived her not as a child, but as a pattern of intentions, layered with memory and fear. You are the requester, the guardian projected. The words weren't sound, they were pressure against her identity. I'm here to stop the activation, Amara said. The ones who triggered you don't speak for this galaxy. They're trying to kill a star with billions of living souls around it. Souls are stars are my charge. Then listen. She opened her memories. She showed the guardian the history humanity had endured, the council's conquest, the subjugated worlds, the children buried under orbital strikes. She showed the fragile blue marble of Earth teeming with life that had no other home. She showed the faces of the 12 volunteers whose hearts were beating in tandem with hers, risking themselves for a star they'd never touch. The guardian's attention shifted. It felt the other minds, the gestalt, the web of fragile mortal courage. You offer yourselves as conduits for the counterpulse. You know this will break you. We know. A pause that stretched like centuries. Then the guardian made a choice that its creators had wired into its core. It would not permit unworthy activation. The council had bypassed the request protocol that made the activation invalid. The Guardian would instead accept the human Gestalt as the legitimate interface. The counterpulse flowed in the material universe. The Zio's engine flickered. The beam that had been gathering to destroy Saul reversed its polarity and discharged harmlessly into the void, scattering into a trillion harmless photons. The engine's physical structure cracked from the strain, its ancient alloys shattering on the resolute vow. The neurologist watched in horror as the neural manifolds went into overload. The volunteers convulsed, alarms howled. Amara's vitals flatlined for 9 seconds. Then silence. Pell opened his eyes first, his head splitting with pain, but his mind intact. The other volunteers stirred, groggy, alive, but Amara remained still, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. The neurological monitors showed activity, fragmented, deep, locked in a coma from which there was no clear path back. Admiral Seed stood over the cradle, her jaw tight. She's still in there, the patterns fractured but not gone. The tactical officer's voice broke the quiet. Admiral, the council is transmitting on all frequencies, unconditional surrender. The Zio's engine had been their last hope. Now it was a ring of cooling debris. The galaxy had turned, but the girl who turned it was somewhere in the dark, fighting a battle they could no longer see. Part 5. The Guardian's realm dissolved around Amara in ribbons of fatting cognition. Gist had done its work, shunting the counterpulse through 12 living channels. But the rupture point was her mind. She felt herself scatter, memories peeling away like pages torn from a book, her sense of self thinning into a fog of static and fragmented emotion. She was aware of the others, Pell's steady determination, a sharp ache of love for a face she didn't recognize, a tactical analyst's structured thoughts collapsing into raw survival instinct, a Marine's furious refusal to die. Their presence had been a scaffolding while the pulse raged. Now the scaffolding was withdrawing and she was falling. The Guardian's final communication arrived, not as language but as a single searing image, a candle flame in a hurricane, refusing to go out. Then the link severed and Amara was alone in the dark of her own skull, aboard the resolute vow. The medical team worked in controlled desperation. Dr. Fenn, the ship's chief neurologist, had seen combat trauma, neural burnout, even the ghosting remnants of failed interface links. He had never seen a mind map like Amara's. Her cortical activity wasn't absent, it was kaleidoscopic, firing patterns that corresponded to no known conscious state, deep dreams maybe, or a mind rebuilding itself, one synapse at a time. Admiral Cito gave the order she never wanted to give: keep her on life support, all available resources. I don't care if we have to borrow a medical frigate from the Empirean fleet. She doesn't die. The ceasefire was holding across 8,000 light years. Council forces laid down weapons under the watchful guns of human fleets. The once proud Keth Archon, captured attempting to flee aboard a private yacht, was filmed in restraints for a broadcast that would become the defining image of the war's end. The Veil prefects who had ordered the hunt for the key surrendered personally to a human marine captain and asked in a voice stripped of arrogance whether Amara had survived. The question rippled across the negotiation channels. The human response was carefully worded: the key indoors. In the weeks that followed, Ambassador Tor led the ceasefire negotiations from A converted passenger liner docked at the neutral station of Telarisport. The council delegates arrived hollow-eyed and cooperative. The terms were non-negotiable: dissolution of the Convergent Races Charter, release of all subjugated protectorates, full disarmament of council-specific military technology, a human-led interim oversight body with a 5-year mandate to restructure galactic governance. No one argued the Zio's engines' destruction had broken something deeper than their fleets, and through it all, Amara slept. Dr. Finn spent hours at her bedside reviewing the neural scans. Something strange was happening beneath the Kamioma surface. The fragmented patterns were slowly coalescing, aligning into a coherent architecture. It was as if her mind was drafting blueprints, laying foundations. The process was methodical, deliberate, not the random firing of a damaged brain, but the purposeful construction of a new internal landscape. On the 34th day, Finn noticed a secondary data stream bleeding into her cortical monitor. It carried encryption tags. He recognized the turns residual command nodes still functioning in a low-power maintenance state across the galaxy. Amara's sleeping mind was connected to them. Listening, he informed Cedo immediately. The Admiral stood beside the bed for a long time, studying the girl's motionless face. She's still in the network, Cedo said. More than that, Admiral, she's monitoring everything. Inbound communicates, ceasefire, compliance reports, even internal council chatter. They think we can't. Here, she's aware. Can she wake up? Finn hesitated. I think she's choosing not to. Not yet. She's waiting for something. The answer came 2 weeks later. A decrypted intelligence report landed on Cedo's desk. A rogue council faction operating from a hidden bastion in the Rixis Nebula had bypassed the surrender and was rallying remnant forces. They had a small fleet, no planet killers, but enough firepower to strike a human colony. The bastion's location was shielded by a scattering field that human sensors couldn't pierce. Finn was in the medical bay when Amara opened her eyes. He dropped his data slate. Doctor to command, she's awake. Amara's voice was a rasp, barely audible. I know about Rixis, the bastion. I heard their plans through the maintenance nodes. I have the coordinates. Cedo arrived within minutes, her uniform half-bitten. You've been conscious the whole time. Most of it. I needed to see if the surrender was real. It mostly is. The bastion is the last infection. Amara tried to sit up, grimacing. I can guide a strike. The turn can still reach them. The Admiral knelt beside the bed. You've done enough. We have tactical officers who can handle this. No, you don't. The bastion scattering field is adaptive. You'd lose half a task force punching through, but their internal comms still run on a council sub-protocol that they turn infected. I can shut down their point defense before the strike arrives. It has to be me. Cedo looked at Finn, who gave a reluctant nod. The neural architecture Amara had rebuilt was stable, stronger even than before. The coma hadn't been a collapse. It had been a transformation. One condition, Cedo said. You don't go into the network alone again. We lost you once. Amara's lips curved into a ghost of a smile. I'm never alone in the network. There are 12 people who left pieces of themselves in my head. They're still here. I'm okay. She swung her legs off the bed, bare feet touching the cold deck. Somewhere in the Rixis Nebula, Rogue Admiral was drafting a speech. about defiance and rebirth, unaware that the key had just woken up and was already inside his walls. The galaxy had turned once, it was about to turn one last time. Part 6. The Strike on the Rixus. Bastion lasted 6 hours. It was not a battle, it was a dismantling. Amara, seated in the interface cradle with her hands resting on her knees, threaded through the Bastion's network like a needle pulling a single thread that unraveled an entire garment. The scattering field dropped, the point defense turrets locked themselves into diagnostic mode. The rogue admiral's flagship vented atmosphere from every non-essential compartment when the life support algorithm swapped its pressure tables with a garbage collection. Routine. Human assault shuttles landed unopposed. The rogue admiral was captured in his quarters, still shouting orders into a comm unit that had become a brick. By the time the Rixus Nebula's dust clouds had settled, the last remnant of the old Council military machine was a collection of prisoners and cold metal. Ambassador Tor announced the final dissolution of the convergent races. Charter from the deck of the Resolute. Val with Amara standing beside him. Thin, pale, and steady, the broadcast reached every world, the image of the girl who had faced execution and emerged not as a victim, but as an architect of peace, burned itself into the galactic consciousness. What the public didn't know was the secret Tor had uncovered during the ceasefire negotiations. Among the captured council archives was a classified operations file stamped with the seal of the Veal Prefecture. The file detailed a contingency plan labeled Leverage Fallback. The plan's authors had never intended to execute Amara. The entire broadcast was a performance designed to pressure humanity into accepting harsh terms by dangling the girl's life at the last moment before the prisms fired. They would have commuted the sentence, placed her in permanent custody, and used her as a bargaining chip for decades. The disintegration field was set to discharge at 10% intensity, enough to terrify, not to kill. Tor read the file in the presence of the surviving council delegates. The Keth Archon, already stripped of his rank, looked at the floor. The Veil prefects met to gaze. You didn't know to said you thought she would die. You thought your bluff was real. Salier's voice was brittle. The bluff was the council's. I opposed it. I was outvoted. And yet you still ordered the hunt for the key. Silence. Tor closed the file. Humanity didn't need your bluff to make our choice. You saw what we did with 27 minutes. Now imagine what we do with a century of peace. That's the galaxy you helped create, Prefect, a galaxy where humanity has no reason to turn again. The delegates were escorted out. Tor visited Amara in the medical bay afterward and told her the truth about the execution that nearly was. She listened without expression, then nodded. Slowly, they built a cage and called it mercy. We built a key and called it freedom. I know which one I'd rather be. You were ready to die up there, Tor said. I was ready to make it count. There's a difference. She paused, and some of the old fragility crept back into her face. When I was in the coma, I heard voices, the guardian, the people. In the Gestalt, a girl from Keeley's who died in the uprising. She told me that surviving is harder than dying because surviving means you have to look at what you became and decide whether you can live with it. Can you? Amra looked out the viewport at the stars. I'm working On it, the final piece of the turns. Legacy emerged 3 months later. Human engineering team dismantling the last of the Council's network. Infrastructure discovered a dormant data cache that the logic plague had sealed. And hidden, the cache contained star charts, xenology records, and navigational data for a region of space. Beyond the galaxy's spiral arm, a region where an extinct civilization had fled from something they called only the hunger. The cache wasn't a weapon, it was a warning, and the extinct civilization was the same one that had built the Zio's engine. Amara was the first person the Admiral briefed. She sat in a conference room with Torcido and a handful of top analysts listening as the ancient data was decoded. They ran from it, Cedo said, a force that consumed entire star systems. They built the engine to reignite stars after it passed, but it kept coming. Eventually, they ran out of stars to save, to rubbed his temples, and now were sitting on the edge of its last known trajectory. The room fell quiet. Amara leaned forward and studied the star chart, tracing the hunger's projected path with her finger. It's still out there, isn't it? We don't know. The records are millions of years old, but the trajectory suggests it could return. Amara's implant flickered with a familiar cadence, the turn's carrier wave, repurposed now as a constant passive alert system. She kept it active, partly as a security blanket, partly because she didn't know how to be disconnected anymore. If it comes back, she said, the galaxy needs to be ready. Not a council, not a human protectorate. Something new. Everyone studied her. Are you proposing what I think you're proposing? I'm proposing we build something that won't need a key next time, something that doesn't rely on a single person to turn the lock. She met the Admiral's eyes. The turn was a weapon born from desperation. The next thing we create has to be born from hope, or it won't survive what's coming. Tor exhaled. That sounds like a lifetime of work. Amara smiled, and it was tired and bright all at once. Good thing I'm young. The star chart glowed on the table between them. Beyond it, in the deep black of the outer arm, the hunger slept or drifted or raced forward. No one knew, but humanity, with its battered allies and its scarred key, had just decided not to wait for it to arrive. Part 7. Hall of Unity stood on the surface of Telarisport, which had been rebuilt from a neutral way station into the seat of the new inner-size compact. Its architecture deliberately blended human steel and Keth stone, Vale glass, and Zerai fluid alloys. The ceiling arced upward in a helix of living wood and polymer, and the central assembly floor was a circle with no raised plinths, no thrones. Delegates sat at equal level, arranged not by species, but by the regions they represented. Amara Vass walked into the hall on a morning that smelled of rain from the station's atmospheric recyclers. She wore a simple gray coat over a civilian tunic, her hair cropped short and threaded with a streak of white that had grown in during the coma and never darkened. The neural implant behind her ear was still active, but it no longer linked to a tactical net. It linked to the compact civil monitoring system, quiet consensual network that tracked resource distribution, ecological recovery, and treaty compliance across thousands of worlds. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a delegate. The assembly session that day dealt with agricultural rights on 4 former subject worlds that had been striped by The council, the debate dragged, occasionally heated but ultimately resolved in a compromise that left no one entirely satisfied, which as to like to say was the hallmark of a functioning democracy. Amara spoke only once when a young K representative argued that humanity's military oversight unfairly favored their own interests. She rose and walked to the central speaking circle, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes. "I understand your concern," she said. "I was a weapon shaped by human hands. I know what our species is capable of when we act alone. That's exactly why the oversight protocols include mandatory multi-SES review panels. The point isn't to give humanity power. The point is to make sure no one ever holds power alone again." The KE representative considered her words, then inclined his massive head, accepted Delegate Voss. The session adjourned. Amara lingered in the hall as the other delegates filtered out, chatting in clusters. She walked to one of the tall windows and looked out at the docking spires where ships from a dozen civilizations lay berthed. The scars of the war were still visible. Zerai freighter with patched hull plates, a Veil cruiser stripped of its weapons, its broadsides now lined with observation domes for scientific missions. A small voice spoke behind her. "You're the one who was on the broadcast." Amara turned. Achilles' child, no more than 8 cycles old, stood clutching a data pad. Her skin was the deep green of Kelly's copper biosphere, and her large eyes were solemn. "I am," Amara said. "What's your name?" "Lissy. My mother died in the uprising. My father says you helped start it." The words could have been an accusation, but the child's tone was simply curious. Amara knelt so they were at eye level. "I was on Keeley's for 2 years before I was captured," she said. "I knew your mother's name." "Kala, wasn't it?" She ran a medical station in the southern tunnels. Lissy's eyes widened. "You knew her?" "I did. She bandaged my arm once when a patrol drone grazed me. She told me that no matter how long the council occupied your world, Kelly's would never stop being Keeley's. She was brave in a way I couldn't be. She stayed even when she could have escaped. I only left because I was taken." Lissy was quiet for a moment, then she said, "My father says we should hate humans because the war came to our world because of you." Amara didn't flinch. "Your father isn't wrong to feel that way. The war did come to Kelly's. A lot of people died, and the pain of that doesn't vanish because the fighting stopped. If I could have found a way to free your world without a single life lost, I would have. But the council didn't give us that path. They gave us cages and called them laws. We chose to break the cages. Sometimes breaking things means you get cut." Lissy looked down at her data pad, which displayed a crude drawing of a flower. "Kelly's night bloom. I drew this for the memorial. They're putting names on the wall in the park. My mother's name will be there. Would you like me to come with you to see it?" The child hesitated, then nodded. They walked together through the station's arboretum, past trees imported from Earth and Keeley's and a dozen other worlds, their roots tangled in shared soil. The memorial wall was a long curve of polished stone, already half filled with names etched in the scripts of 14 species. Lissy found her mother's name near the bottom, pressed her small hand against it, and stood very still. Amara stood beside her, not speaking. There were names on that wall. She knew a Keel fighter who'd covered her retreat, a human marine who died breaching the Execution chamber. Pell's cousin Hood. Served on a frigate lost in the first exchange over Duras. She carried all of them in the architecture of her rebuilt mind, their sacrifices woven into the pattern that had let her wake up. After a while, Lissy said, "Will it happen again, the war?" Amara considered the question carefully. "I think wars happen when people forget that the other side has names they love too. The compact is built to help us remember. It won't be perfect, nothing ever is, but your mother's name is on this wall, and so is mine, in a way not written but carried. As long as we keep carrying them, we have a chance." Lissy slipped her hand into Amara's. They stood like that for a long moment, and the arboretum's artificial wind stirred the leaves above them. Later, when the child had been collected by a keel guardian who regarded Amara with guarded but not hostile eyes, Amara returned to her quarters. She pulled up a star chart on her console, the same chart she'd first seen in the briefing room months ago, the one that showed the hunger's projected path. The compact had dispatched a deep space survey mission to investigate the region. They'd found nothing yet. Maybe the hunger was extinct, maybe it had changed course, maybe it was a myth, but Amara didn't believe in myths anymore. She believed in readiness. She touched her implant and opened a private channel to Admiral Cito. The deep survey fleet just checked in. Still no contact. Cito's voice came back, warm but guarded. "And if they find something, then we'll have a compact fleet ready to meet it. Not a human fleet, not a council remnant, a fleet with Keely, Keth, Veal, Zari, and human ships flying the same formation. That's the whole point. You've grown into quite the diplomat. I learned from watching what happens when diplomacy fails." Amara closed the star chart and looked out her viewport at the lights of Telerisport. Somewhere out there, Lissy was probably showing her father the Nightbloom drawing. Somewhere else, Tor was negotiating trade routes with a former enemy who had become a cautious friend. And somewhere in the deep black, the darkness that had swallowed the engine's creators might be sleeping or might be waking. Amara whispered a name into the quiet of her room, a name that belonged to a friend who hadn't lived to see the peace. Then she straightened, squared her shoulders, and went back to work. The galaxy had turned in 27 minutes. Keeping it turned toward the light would take a lifetime. She was ready.